morning, everybody. I just noticed I've got some horns kicking up this morning. I wanted to come on here this morning because I often come on here and I provide information around business and business life, marketing, digital marketing specifically. I'm part of a cellular health network marketing company, and I also have my coaching. But one thing I want to dive into today, and I'm only going to be here for a short period of time. So if you ever want to comment, please do. But I want to share, like, outside of business, we still have a life that's happening around us. And for me and in my world, life is very challenging because we have a child that has special needs. And what do I need? What do I mean by special needs? Well, early on, she was very quiet, very shy. We just assumed it was shyness. She was a child that was perfect as a baby. She never fussed, she never got upset unless she hurt herself. So I never had that child that threw temper tantrums on a regular basis. I can count on one hand actually how many times she threw a temper tantrum, and she's now 17, almost 18. So she's been that perfect child in that regard, but we've had challenges and very shy, not speaking when spoken to, especially with strangers, and we just passed it off to be shyness. Well, in grade 8, she was actually assessed through the school because they noticed early on, and she was assessed with learning disabilities, but was never diagnosed with anything. So they focused on the educational piece and helping her bring up her math, her English, her social skills in the courses, like social courses, not social interaction. So with that, she increased her grades. Obviously, she had extra supports, extra help. They put IPs in place. But in grade 8, when they assessed her during COVID, it was actually in the middle of COVID. She was actually being homeschooled at the time. And they diagnosed her with ADD. So she didn't have the hyper deficit disorder, just the focus disorder. And she had high social anxiety, so they converted her anxiety from generalized anxiety to high social anxiety, and she was diagnosed with select mutism, and I'm like, "Yeah, she's select mutism, she chooses not to speak for years," and that's not what select mutism is. Select mutism, we had to learn, is the inability to speak when under high stressful situations. So, take her high social anxiety, for example. You put her in front of a group of people, especially loud people. If that anxiety kicks in, she's unable to articulate. She cannot articulate. She goes into that high freeze, flight, or fight mode. So for her, she freezes. She doesn't fight. She doesn't flight. She does flight when she can, but I've seen her get so severe that even her physical body freezes. So that's what the select mutism is. She's unable to articulate and her body shuts down. No eye contact, no um, interaction, and struggles with that ability to communicate even with the hands, like to even just say stop and not like to gesture. She just can't right now. Doesn't happen. So it wasn't until, I'm going to say, last summer. So she was 17 years old. So whenever you get this video, she was 17 years old. It was August. It actually started in May. We had an incident, and I ended up calling our local mental health line. And instantly, just explaining the situation that happened that day, the lady said, "Has she ever been tested for autism?" And I'm like, "No, but she's asked me if I thought she was autistic." Now, understand, I don't have a lot of autistic people around me, so I don't know a lot about autism. So when she asked me if I thought she was autistic like 2 years prior, I'm like, "No," because my version and my understanding of autism are people who have highly severe overload sensitivity. So you see adults and kids with earmuffs on to help drown out the noise of everything going on around them. Or some of them have sensitivities to touch. They have speech, they have twitches, they may tap or do things that are different than what the average person would do, for example. That was my version of autism. So I'm like, "No, you don't have autism." And when the lady asked me if she was ever assessed for autism, I'm like, no. And then when she started to explain what high functioning autism or neurodivergence is, my jaw dropped. Because without her knowing my child, she described her to a T. And I was like, oh my God. So that started the process of getting her assessed. Well, I'm sure this is generalized everywhere, but I'm going to just talk about my experience here in Alberta because it is different every province, every state, every country. But to start the assessment process for her, they told me that you can get it done for free if you go to a local hospital. Like here in Canada, we have health services supposedly. But to do that and have Alberta Health Services cover it, it was a 7-year wait time. 7 years. I'm like, "That's not happening." Absolutely not. And we didn't have the money at the time. I had been laid off from my job. I was getting my business up and running, so we didn't have a lot of extra money. And I was like, "Absolutely not waiting 7 years. This is not an option." Like, she just had a mental health crisis, which led to this. So I said, "I am not waiting 7 years." So I said, "What are my other options?" "Well, you can go have it done privately, like, within a week or 2, and give them time to do the assessment." It takes probably a week or 2 for them to process the assessment, but that cost here in Alberta at that time could range between 2,000 to 2,500, upwards of 3,000. So 2 to 3,000 depending on where you live and your current um, state, country, province. Here in Canada, it's ranging from 2 to 3,000 per assessment. Well, we didn't have it, but I thought, you know what? If I have to go that route, I'll figure it out. I'll get the money somehow. I'll figure it out. And so I started digging, like, what other options are there? So everybody said I had to call my doctor. I said, well, I'm not going through my doctor. She's like 3 to 4 months or more wait time just to get in to see her to get a referral. So I said, no, I'm not waiting. So I kept digging. And I ended up going to her counselor that assessed her in grade 8. And she guided me to go back to the principal at the school and ask what resources were available for lower income families, for example, and what avenues were available for assessment. We ended up having her assessed here in Alberta through the school system. Now, that may not be available to everyone in every province. I don't know. It probably very much depends on the school district specifically. No idea. But we ended up going through the school. The principal was he's familiar with her, he's familiar with her challenges. Even though they're a huge school, he knows her personally. So he met with me personally and we had this discussion. And he was a huge supporter, huge advocate. And he was kind of in my back corner. So I had his support. I don't know what level he contributed to it, but we ended up having her assessed in the summertime. So this was May. We had the report in our hands by August of yes, she was autistic. She's high functioning, she's neurodivergent. But then lies the questions, okay, what's next? What do we do next? And that's when I realized because she was just turned 17, there's a huge gap. And I struggle with this gap because I'm a bull moose, like I'm a go-getter. So when I have something that's fallen on my plate that I need to deal with and it's important, I don't take the status quo generalized trail. I just don't. I don't like waiting. I don't believe in these long wait times for free services through our so-called free healthcare system. It's in crisis. Right straight across the board. Even in the US, I'm being told that the healthcare system in that regard is in crisis. There's huge, huge wait times. This is not okay. Doesn't matter if you're physical or mental, they matter just as equally. So it's important that as parents specifically that we recognize this and don't wait. Like dig your heels in and ask people who have been through it, what did they do? Ask for resources. Like I called my doctor and said, I'm not coming in for an appointment because I'm not waiting 4 to 5 months. I need to know what my next move is. They sent me a referral for private consult without even knowing my situation, whether or not I could afford the 2,000 to 3,000 out of pocket. They just sent me to this clinic and said, here, get her assessed here. It was a private clinic at a pocket expense. So you can't even rely on the professionals that are out there because they're not invested in you specifically. They're not invested in your situation. If you have a GP that is, then you're lucky, but I didn't have that here. So because I refused to book an appointment and wait 5 months for a face to face, I got tossed into, here you go. So that I was like, okay, it's an option. I'll take it if I need it. But we ended up doing it through school. So she gets assessed, and I'm like, okay, what's next? So this child, not knowing she had autism prior, because of the autism and how she functions, because it's not a disease, it's not an illness, it's something that's not curable per se, but because she processes differently, we'd already done therapies in the past. We've done speech therapy. We've done, she's done the sit down therapy like this in the past. So she's already shut down to that option. Not even knowing, like, if we had known this when she was younger, we could have learned and taken different routes, different avenues, and understood earlier versus traumatizing her, treating her like an average child that is functioning like an average child, but actually not. She's got fixated ways of processing information. And when she has a negative experience, her process is that, okay, I've had a bad experience with therapy or it didn't help. So all therapies suck. And that's not the case. So now, as parents dealing with a teenager that we're talking is independent, like she's high functioning. So she's fairly independent in a lot of ways, but not in others. So she's very much independent in being able to make some of her own decisions and bucking us on it. So when it comes to therapy, it's like, no. And she's aware that if we push it, she can just sit there and shut down and not participate. So when I have family members, for example, that didn't know either, they're like, get her involved in sports. Like, we had our kids involved in stuff and they're fine. Like, they had their struggles, they had whatever, but they're fine now. And I'm like, it's great for you. You pushed your child. They had an average functioning and brain process that the average human has. Mine does not. So when she shuts down, she knows that that is a coping mechanism and she can turn it on or off at her leisure, whether it's, stress kicking in or not. She knows if she shuts down and stops, it all stops. So to push her into, say, sports, for example, and she doesn't want to participate, she's not going to participate. It's a total waste of time, money, and energy for all of us. It's high stress for her because now we're pushing her in a direction she doesn't want to go. And it's a waste of our time and money because she's not going to participate. End of story. And it does not work that way for her. It does not work that way for a lot of kids that have autism or neurodivergence, whatever you want to call it. I'm not a politically correct person, so if you don't like my terminology, then jump off because I'm not going to be politically correct. I'm going to call it for what it is, the way I see it and know it. So that sets us apart from how all the other kids were raised and how they pushed them when they were younger. We pushed her when she was a child. But the problem is, we pushed her, she got herself through it. But the minute it stopped, there was like, no more. I'm never going back. I'm never doing it again. So we had her involved in different things. And the minute she had a bad experience, she was done. And she labels all of it that way. So now that she's done traditional sitting face to face type therapy, nope, doesn't work. Done. Everybody's the same now. So now we're in a place where how can we seek her help to help her learn some things that we're unable to teach her because she doesn't listen to us. But how can we go about finding therapy that's going to function different than just sitting in a chair and having a discussion? How can we find therapy that's going to help educate her in a friendly, sociable way? That's not going to overstimulate the social anxiety, but build that connection, build the trust, build the friendship. She needs friendships. Like, she has no friends, literally. She has no friends because she cut them all off when she finished grade 9. And the minute she went into senior high, 10, 11, and 12, she's made no friends in school. She's connected with a few towards the end of the year, but never stayed in touch with them. She never got their cell numbers. They didn't text, they didn't stay connected. So it was hard for me to keep her connected because she didn't have that that point of continued connection. So for the last 3 years, she's been content being on her own. She's okay not having friends. She hasn't had to deal with any of the drama that you have in senior high school with the girls and the cattiness and all that stuff. She's not dealt with any of that, but she's been fine because she hasn't had to deal with any of that. So, but it's taught her to isolate and be alone, which is also not 100% healthy. We're social beings and she has social anxiety. So, how can we now get her the support she needs and have it delivered in such a way that she's open to receive it? And that's what we're up against as parents. I'm in the process of researching and digging all that up. And what I'm finding is I live near Edmonton, Alberta, that the Edmonton Autism Society is so tapped, capped, and strapped with their resources. It's hard to get an answer. It's hard to get one on one FaceTime or call time. It's a ton of reading. Like their website is so freaking detailed and in depth. It's great information. But again, I struggle with what's there because it's boxed information. It's like if you have a child, this is it. There's not a lot for kids in her age range to provide her the supports that she needs. And the challenge I have, and I even said this in one of the meetings, is that these are kids that require flexibility because they process things differently. You can't give them a set of rules and expect them to stay within those boundaries because those boundaries might not work for them. So for dealing with I'm going to call it a condition because it's not a disease, it's a way of thinking. So dealing with their challenges, you're taking a human being that has different neurological pathways and you're boxing them into society's box of, you know, set of limitations, so to speak. And I feel like they're limiting these kids, these people, and they're very boxed. So if she's 17, she's old enough that she probably doesn't fit into the kids groups. And in 6 to 8 months, she's going to be 18, which is going to take her out of that and into this. But yet she's not old enough to attend this. And I'm like, so she's left hanging in the most critical time of her life. And that's when she's transitioning from high school to life. Like finishing high school and going to secondary education and or not going to any education at all is huge for her and a lot of people with the neurodivergence diagnosis because they're structured, they need routine, they need structure in the sense of what's next. You need to explain it to them potentially over and over again. Routine is key. A simple thing like my husband helping her rearrange her room the way she wanted it rearranged. He did it without her being here. And when she got home from school, her room was done, set up the way she wanted it. But because it happened without her knowledge, it set her off. It was not a good thing. You cannot surprise this child. And a lot of kids with neurodivergence are the same. They don't take surprise well. They're structured routine. They need time to prep and prepare up in here. And part of the reason they need that, because it's not the sole reason, and every person and child is different, is because they've got so much going on up in here. They can't quiet any one piece of it. So for you and I as average human beings, if we're having a conversation, we can focus in and hone in. Like I can focus like nobody's business. There could be a band playing right near me and I can hone in and focus and deal with what's right in front of me. And she's unable to do that. So with them, the people that deal with neurodivergence, a lot of them will have everything going on up here all at once, right down to the temperature and the feel of the air on their skin is coming into play when they're trying to deal and focus and have a conversation. So, sound, touch, feelings are all happening. They can't box them or set them aside. It's all happening at once. And that's why they get so exhausted so quickly. So when she comes home from school, she's overly exhausted sometimes because they call it masking so much to be able to get through the day of that routine. But yet she loves that routine because it's known, but it takes so much of her energy just to get through it that when she's done school, she's done. She's napping. she's tapped out. So now we have challenges with sleep. We have challenges with eating. We have challenges, a lot of different things. So being able to map all that out for a child that's stuck in this box that our society has put them in, and not having resources for them here because they're almost 18 and she's not allowed to go here because she's not 18 yet. I even asked the question, I was like, okay, why are we so boxed with a group of people that require flexibility? Help me understand this. And I couldn't get an answer. So I'm hoping that these autism societies throughout Canada, throughout the United States, and other countries learn to be more flexible, engage each individual, and box them where they need to be. Because some of these autistic children, I'm going to call them, or young adults that are transitioning between, teen and adult, like my daughter is high functioning. She is probably going to fit in the adult realm at 17 versus somebody that's lower functioning in that regard and has more sensories going on, may not have the maturity, and at 17 maybe they need to stick with the kids group, because some of these kids, even as adults, never really transition to the adult mode. They're always going to need that parental guidance or support in some way. So some of these people will be able to function and live on their own, and some of them will never get there. So it's such a wide gap that they need to judge each one individually, but they don't. They've got them boxed. So I've been on a huge journey, and it's going to continue. I'm looking at possibly mapping everything out that I go through over this next little period, and mapping it out for parents to have a guide of things they need to look at, because when they're first diagnosed, it's a lot. It's high stress on the parents. You've got to take time for yourself. And I love that the Autism Society brings that to your attention, saying, parents, your kids need you more now than ever. You need to take care of yourself. So even though it's high stress for you and you've got all this work to do, you also need to make sure that you're taken care of as well. And, therapy for you and your spouse, and therapy for the kids if they need it. Maybe it's just us. Like, I'm seeking out therapy for my husband and I to help us understand her better, help us understand autism better, because it's too much reading for me. I am not a reader. I hate reading. And I've got, like, I could easily have 100 bookmarks open on my computer to have to read up on autism. That's just autism alone. And I'm not going to do it. I need to have that conversation. So I'm looking at setting up private therapy for my husband and I to be able to understand autism, explain her specifically, and how can we communicate with her differently than what we've always done, so we can try to break free and break through to her. How can I help her get proper therapy, and what does that look like to teach her to be more flexible and to not judge when she has one bad experience, to gauge the whole industry or the whole block of, you know, under the same judgment, because that's not right either. And she's going to make her world very small very quickly if she continues to do that. So how do we break that blockage in her and open that door for her, open that up for her? So I'm on this journey as well as my business to be able to function in life with her, and that's a very large piece of my life. And it gets emotional because it's tough sometimes. It's hard to acknowledge that you now have a child that's not like the average person. She's special and different in the sense that she's a genius in some ways and is handicapped in some ways and requires extra help and support. Um, Things that most parents don't think of. And this was actually brought up in one of the autism meetings I was in recently. A woman was 70 years old with her son still living at home under her roof, needing her, and he's in his 30s, because he struggles to maintain a job, which a lot of them do. And he's doing what my daughter's doing as a teenager, and that's hibernating in his room and just playing video games. And like she said, I live here in this specific town. I don't want to get specific on people's information, but she lives in this town and there's no other family members around. She's in her 70s and he's in his 30s. And she's like, I need to prepare. Like, my lifespan is is coming closer and closer. I need to prepare. Like, what do I need to do to make sure he's taken care of after I'm gone? And I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm like, that's a very valid question. Like, I have wills in place for her, but she's turning 18 in a few months, and that puts her in the same category. I'm now in the same situation as this woman that is voicing this concern. I'm like, I need to deal with this now because at 18, my current will is no longer valid because she's now an independent age to make decisions for herself. She no longer has guardianship. She's considered an adult and an individual that can function on her own according to laws and society. So I need to make sure and I need to figure out what's that next move because we're in a transition of helping ourselves, helping her, and transitioning through all of this stuff. And not just people with autism, any disability, because every disability is different. You can have a perfectly normal functioning human being up here, but maybe they're handicapped from the waist down. Maybe they're handicapped from here down. So they have wheelchair needs and they have different disability needs that have to happen and they're living at home. These people are capable of living on their own, but it's different than the average person because they need wheelchair access. They need ability to travel to and from to get groceries. Somebody may have to help them with that if they're paralyzed from here down. It's not like you're grabbing your own groceries off the shelf at that point. So you need these extra supports and extra help. And where do you find them? As a parent, you need to figure out and know what that map looks like. So I want to be able to create that map over the next, 6 months to a year. It's already been 6 months, but build that up as I go through my experience so I can help parents. It doesn't matter if their kid has autism or if they're paralyzed in a wheelchair. You can use that roadmap and pick and choose what pieces apply to you to take care of things in your situation. Take what applies to you and have a checklist, so to speak, because that's one thing I do see lacking throughout. When she brought that up, we're in a support meeting and not one person stepped up and said, this would be your next step. This is where you need to connect, or let's connect on an individual basis and let's have that conversation. None of that happened. And because that didn't happen, my jaw dropped because I see these gaps. And I'm like, I need to help these people. Like, I have a business to help people. I have a business to help parents earn extra money to help deal with this stuff. I have a business to help with mindset to help you get through it, but I'm dealing with it myself. But I know what I have to do because I'm there. But a lot of people aren't there. They don't know that they need to go get the extra therapy or they don't recognize that they need to do certain things. So I want to be able to map this stuff out. And the society does a great job. Like I said, hundreds of pages that you could read through, pick and choose what, applies to you. But as I'm reading through it, it's really geared towards kids and or specifically adults. And there's a gap with young adults in that transitional stage. And I really do feel that jobs may not be the answer for a lot of these kids. They may need to work independently as their own solopreneur. And what does that look like for them? I don't see those supports there to help them with that. And I feel that's a viable way for them to have an income stream. And it's not explored. It's all about the job. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so old school thinking and mentality. And the jobs don't work well for them. So you're putting them in a situation of chaotic, like more of woof for them. And it's like, why? Why not work with them? And maybe I'll be able to do this in the future, but be able to work with them and help them niche down. Like, what are your strengths? What do you love? How can we turn that into an independent business for them so they can thrive just like you and I can thrive by their own free will because they still have free will. They're just not taught how to practice it and what works best for them. And I find this gap missing in therapies as well. So, because I do feel there's a lot of therapies that are very boxed as well. So, I struggle with therapy myself, but I am seeking it. But I get to have that free will of choice and questioning. And, I get to probe the therapist and say, WTF and why. So, but a lot of parents won't take that bold step and it comes naturally to me. So I want to be able to help parents and guide them. And if it means taking bold steps, guide them how they can do it so it doesn't feel so bold, it doesn't feel so big. So that's my next plan. Things that I'm working on. I hope you guys found this helpful and valuable. And I ask you that, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I may not have the answers, but I can certainly guide you and help you with what I'm aware of at this stage. And my knowledge base is growing and evolving as I go capture more and more information and as I have discussions and as I take care of my own stuff. I'll be able to help in that regard. But, you know, I really feel there's a huge gap here. I'm looking at in the future creating a community for these parents and young adults to be able to join and contribute as well to help the parents understand their point of view, have that a safe space for them to connect and collaborate with each other, have safe space. I mean, there's a lot of it happening out there now in society that it's happening there, but it's there's gaps. There's definitely gaps. So I want to help bridge those gaps as best I can. I'm not going to mend every crack. That's not going to happen. Not from this soulpreneur, but certainly why not add to it? Why not help fill some of the cracks at least and get the foundation stronger? And that's my goal, that's my plan. So thank you so much for listening and joining. And like I say, feedback. I am using Restream and it does not allow you to comment on Facebook after this stream stops. You'll be able to watch it. So if you do want to comment, either go to my DMs or even go to another post of mine and just say, I seen your replay, your live replay. I can't comment there. Can I comment here? And just give me your comment, but let me know you're talking from a live stream. And yeah, once I get streaming services narrowed down on which one I'm going to go with, it'll be paid service and you'll be able to comment. But right now, I'm testing out different ones, which limits that ability on Facebook only. YouTube, you'll be able to comment for sure. And especially YouTube, because that's all business. And I want people to know and understand that life happens outside of business. And, sometimes you can bring it together, sometimes it just has to stay separate. And for me, it's going to come together because this is going to be part of my business and how I support people. I'm going to have free offerings and I'm going to have paid offerings for people that want to dive deeper or get resources. And, I'm going to have some free offerings for people that be able to access information to help guide them through this process because there is no right or wrong answer. It's just is. So where's the gaps? How can we mend them? How can we fix them? How can we fill those cracks? So thank you for joining me. I will be back soon. Take care of you.